Well, better late than never.
Marvel is everywhere. There's films, there's TV shows, there's cartoon series, it's on posters, coffee mugs, plastic lunchboxes.
We spared no expense.
The Marvel movies are insanely popular. A lot of them make over $1 billion at the box office. I mean, that's not normal. People who never go to see movies are going along to see these things. Some people are going to see them multiple times each. It's insane how superheroes have made their way into every part of popular culture. Stan Lee is so well known, he's about as recognisable as George Lucas at this point. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has been groundbreaking in many ways. They've taken the serialised TV format and applied that to film, and it works. The only other series I can think of that predates the MCU that's had lots of different characters feature in solo films and then team up for big event movies is the Godzilla franchise, but even then they've rebooted the continuity a number of times. What's unusual about the MCU is they're not only the ones that arguably invented the cinematic universe, but they're also the only ones who are successful at it. It's very rare that the people who come up with an idea are also the ones that do it the best. And since the MCU started, there's been no end of companies trying to replicate that success. We've got enough failed cinematic universes to fill a graveyard. Do you remember the Dark Universe? Well, if you do, you're probably the only one. They tried to start it with the Dracula Untold, but that failed, so they tried again with Tom Cruise's Mummy, and that failed even more.
No!
So they got all their plans for the Bride of Frankenstein and the Invisible Man and all that other crap, and they threw them in the bin where they belong. And you've also got Ghostbusters 2016, which they had plans for sequels and spin-offs and loads of other crap for a cinematic universe. The film did so bad they cancelled the sequels, but the plans for spin-offs and a shared universe are still alive and well though. So the ghost of Ghostbusters 2016 is still around. It's not dead yet. Then you've got the Conjuring universe. That King Arthur film that nobody saw was meant to set up some kind of shared universe somehow. The Amazing Spider-Man cinematic universe, which they announced plans for about 10 future movies before they even got their second film out. And since The Amazing Spider-Man 2 failed, they're now taking those cinematic universe plans and nailing them to the Venom film instead, which now gives us the Venomverse. You've also got the Monsterverse with Godzilla and King Kong. Oh, and the DC Universe, I almost forgot about that. But the MCU has remained on top. Not only are they insanely popular, but they are also consistent. And I can appreciate them as mainstream movies. You can always be pretty sure what you're going to get from a Marvel movie. Sure, some of the movies are good and some are bad, but even the bad ones aren't all that terrible. Mostly. People talk about superhero fatigue, but the films are drawing in more crowds than ever. They're the modern day Star Wars. Marvel even popularised the end credit scene. I mean, end credit scenes are nothing new, but now everyone is doing them. I still remember seeing that He-Man movie years ago, and after the credits, Skeletor pops up saying, "I'll be back." That film came out in 1987, and I'm still waiting for the sequel. So now I'm going to go through all of the MCU films by the dates they were released and put them in order of what I think is the best. At the top are the ones I like the most, and at the bottom you've got all the bad ones. Make sure to let me know what order you'd put the movies in the comments below. Iron Man came out in 2008, and I remember at that time I already thought superheroes were a fading trend. Sure, The Dark Knight was about to be released too, but we'd just had Spider-Man 3 and the Fantastic Four Rise of the Silver Surfer the year before, and both Superman Returns and X-Men The Last Stand in 2006. They were not very good.
They were bad, that's what I'm saying, they were bad.
So I didn't actually see Iron Man when it came out. It was overshadowed by The Dark Knight, and it wasn't until last year that I actually saw it. For so long I've heard people go on about how good this film is, and when I finally got around to watching it recently, I can see why. It's not my favourite, but it's certainly a very good entry. It's aged really well. It's directed by Jon Favreau, and I normally find his films fine. Not that good, not that bad, just fine. He's a very middle-of-the-road director. He's made a few bad films, but they're not that bad, and he's made a few good films, but they're not that good either. But I enjoyed Iron Man quite a bit. The pacing and editing is great. The editing really helps keep this movie entertaining and fun, and they use it to tell you about the characters.
The best thing about Tony is also the worst thing. He's always working.
It's quick, snappy, and tells you a lot about the characters without having someone look into the camera and explain it to you. The film uses editing for comedic purposes quite a lot, and it's refreshing to see. Not enough movies use editing to elicit humour. Iron Man is one of the most predictable movies I've ever seen. Of course this guy is the bad guy. He's bold. It might be predictable, but it's done well. It's a very tight script, and the predictability of it never actually hurt my enjoyment. At the start of the movie, Tony Stark and the soldiers are attacked. I like how they never show the surrounding area, especially when the attack starts. It makes things feel chaotic and like the attack could come from anywhere and everywhere. I knew the vehicle was going to get shot as soon as the scene opened because the way they used the camera, but it was still entertaining. One of the things I loved about this movie is that you're an hour and 15 minutes into the film before you even get to see a single blast from the Iron Man suit. They take the armor suit building very slow, so when we finally get to see the Iron Man suit, it feels more impressive because they've built up anticipation. And the Tony Stark character is entertaining enough that you don't get bored waiting for the Iron Man action scenes. You can tell they made this before Disney bought Marvel. This film has far too much killing and murder to be a Disney movie. I really enjoyed Pepper. She had loads of personality and was really feisty. I also liked how they reincorporated the trophy. He doesn't care about receiving a trophy in some big award ceremony, but then he's given one by Pepper after he's made his turnaround to leave the weapons business. It means something to him, so he keeps it, and I thought that's as far as it would go. It's a nice character moment that shows a change of heart. But then they bring the trophy back again when it saves Tony Stark's life at the end. It's perfect. I generally don't like it when the superhero origin story has the hero face off against a villain with the same powers as them. From a narrative standpoint, I understand why they do it. It makes sense. The hero can go up against a version of himself that would have been if he hadn't made the changes in his life and become a better person. And by winning, it reinforces that his new life choices are the correct ones. I understand it, but I find it's done so often it gets repetitive. With that said, Iron Man is certainly one of the best superhero origin stories I've seen. The weakest part is the last section of the film. Because they need to force a fight at the end, they have to have a few dumb scenes just to get to that conflict. Like the bad guy having all the incriminating evidence stored on his office computer for some reason. Iron Man is a great film. For reference, I'd rate it around a 7 out of 10. Next we have The Incredible Hulk, which is an absolutely terrible film. One of the worst MCU films, if not the actual worst. It's so bad a lot of the time I forcefully blank it from my mind and forget it exists. A lot of people don't even count this as being part of the MCU, which is fine since none of the story carries over to any of the other films and they recast every single one of the actors, apart from General Ross.
Who?
But Marvel have officially stated it is part of the MCU. The Incredible Hulk took everything that was good about Iron Man but made it all bad. Marvel films in general have a problem with colour grading, but this looks like someone threw up all over the screen. I'd rather watch The Incredible Bulk.
Look out! It was an accident.
In Iron Man, it's a long time before you see the armoured suit, but that builds excitement and the movie keeps you entertained with the Tony Stark character. But here, Bruce Banner is boring and the Hulk looks like poop. Everything about this film is so ugly. Bruce Banner sits there looking at a computer screen for most of the movie. I mean, what's exciting about watching a guy trying not to use his superpowers? And when that other Hulk shows up, you know, the bad one, it knocks over this scientist guy and I don't know what happens. He gets hit by the evil Hulk and somehow that only results in a mild graze on his forehead.
Bitch, are you for real?
Getting hit by that monster would turn his head into mush. Some Hulk blood spills over and he gets a few drops on him, and then for some reason his head starts to pulsate. And then he looks directly into the camera and smiles. What the hell was that? You would think this guy would show up again, but this is the last we ever see of him. Stop wasting my time, movie. The story is bland, the characters are dull, and the cinematography is terrible. It's like a high budget made for TV movie. Iron Man 2 definitely feels more like a Jon Favreau movie. You know, that middle of the road, completely serviceable movie with no strong artistic vision. It's not terrible, but after how enjoyable the first Iron Man was, it was a huge step backwards. It feels too concerned with setting up other MCU movies than it does in telling an entertaining story. The film has a lot of subplots that don't really do anything besides work as an advertisement for future movies. Black Widow was a complete waste of space. I don't even know why she's in the movie. Her big action scene is pretty lame. She sweeps a guy's leg and for some reason he doesn't get up again. What's all that about?
She knew my one weakness, that I'm weak.
I don't know why Nick Fury is in it either. It's 2 hours long, but it could easily be cut down to 1 hour and 30 minutes, maybe even 1 hour and 20, and it would be a stronger film for it. They turn Pepper into a nagging damsel in distress. I quite liked her in the first movie. She was able to verbally joust with Tony Stark on equal footing. All she ever does in this is get in the way and has to be saved. The villain has next to no motivation. I can see what people mean when they say Marvel films have a problem with their villains now. Besides that, there were a ton of minor things that irritated me throughout. Tony Stark decides to jump into a race car just as the race is about to start, and for some reason everyone is okay with that. When Rhodey is showing off the War Machine suit at the expo, the bad guy hacks into it and takes control. That's fine, but why did the War Machine suit have live ammunition at an event that is little more than a press conference? That makes perfect sense. That Iron Man suitcase transformation was fantastic though, and the end credit scene is one of my favourites in all of the MCU. It's not a terrible film, just kind of bland. Thor was another one that didn't impress me much. It's yet another superhero origin story that doesn't do anything special or unique to raise it above the others. Everything about this film was bland. Thor was bland, Loki was bland, Natalie Portman is relegated to nothing but a bland love interest. It's not a terrible film, I mean there are plenty of flaws, but I just don't find it entertaining. Thor was just boring. Even the action scenes weren't entertaining enough to give it the occasional point of interest. I'd put it just below Iron Man 2. Captain America the First Avenger is half a good movie. I love the parts before Steve Rogers gets his superpowers because it shows his intelligence. The way he gets the flag from the pole or the answers he gives to the questioning scientist.
Do you want to kill Nazis?
I don't want to kill anyone. I don't like bullies. I don't care where they're from.
It built up his character really well, but after he gets his superpowers they don't know what to do with him, so he just punches everything. I'd place it above Iron Man 2, but nowhere near the first Iron Man movie. And now we have a film that Marvel fans thought they were never going to see. It brings together the legendary characters into one movie, a film that fans have wanted to see for decades. I am of course talking about the Avengers. When I first saw this film, I didn't like it very much. The climax felt disconnected from all the story build-up before it. It's mostly just character moments right up until the end when the finale happens. All the stuff with Loki getting trapped, Hulk busting out of the shield base, Thor fighting Iron Man, Hawkeye getting mind controlled. It all felt irrelevant to the climax of the film. And none of the superheroes do all that much that the army couldn't do. I mean, if you're going to believe Black Widow is effective fighting this alien horde, why wouldn't you have a squad of army guys doing the same thing? Even a group of police officers could do the same. I do like it a lot more now. It's not a film you can really watch multiple times, although I guess I have, so what am I talking about? What I mean is, everything about this film is very surface level. That's not a bad thing, it's funny and entertaining, but there's not really much going on under the surface. So once you've heard all the jokes and seen all the action sequences, there's not much else you can get out of it. That kind of sounds quite negative, but it's not meant to be. The film is simple fun. It's enjoyable seeing the characters working off each other, and all the action scenes were exciting and easy to follow. I love those flying alien worm snake things. I do appreciate how they show the heroes actively saving the civilians. I know that seems obvious, but you'd be surprised how often this aspect is overlooked in superhero movies. The Avengers is a perfect example of casual entertainment. It's perfect for putting on in the background while you do something else and glancing over occasionally. I don't think it's as good as the first Iron Man, but it's better than all the other films in Phase 1. And kicking off Phase 2 of the MCU, we have Iron Man 3, which is fine. Another fine film. Not as good as the first, but better than the second. Since it was my first time watching it recently, I already knew about the twist with the Mandarin, so I couldn't experience it with fresh eyes. I know a lot of people complained about the twist, but I thought it was well done. It wasn't great. From what I understand, the complaints about this twist are simply because it changes the character from what is established in the comics, which I guess is a valid complaint. But no one complained when they changed the Guardians of the Galaxy for the movies. It's just a little something called artistic license. I felt the fire stuff was a bit silly. Previously, Iron Man fought people on a technological level, and I'm not saying every Iron Man film has to be the same. I know you could argue it's technology that makes the virus that gives the bad guys the flame powers, but when you see the central villain literally breathing fire, it felt very goofy. And Pepper gets the virus, and then it's completely reversed at the end of the film with no consequences at all. Still, I enjoyed a lot of the character moments. The stuff with the little kid from Jurassic World kept me entertained, and the fight sequence at the end was a lot of fun. I'd put this in somewhere just below Captain America. Thor: The Dark World. The secondary characters are the most annoying things I've ever seen. I can't think of a more annoying character in a film. I mean, people say Jar Jar Binks and Anakin Skywalker were annoying, but they don't annoy me even half as much as Kat Dennings.
All the answers you seek will be yours once I reclaim Mjolnir.
Mjolnir? What's Mjolnir?
Outside of that, I found this film mind-numbingly boring. It took me 3 attempts just to get through it because I kept falling asleep. Did I mention Kat Dennings was annoying?
Birds? Birds are happening?
The best Marvel movies have a strong director's vision to them, and The Winter Soldier is one such example. The directors have a very clear vision of what they're trying to achieve. They take a character that has a very simple black and white outlook on the world and drop him into a complicated situation to see how he would react. It's the perfect thing to do with a character like Captain America. That scene at the beginning of the movie on the ship is brilliant. Having people actually kill each other really raises the tension. It instantly makes the stakes feel higher, and it works perfectly for setting up the tone for the rest of the film. The twists and turns of the movie are really compelling, and Captain America's friendship with Sam Wilson is fun and provides a little levity to the film. I don't really have much in the way of negatives at all. Perhaps that weird mask thing that Black Widow uses towards the end isn't set up beforehand, so it kind of comes out of the blue. I mean, it doesn't bother me, I don't even know why I'm talking about it. As far as I'm concerned, this is one of the best Marvel movies they've made so far, definitely in my top 5 MCU movies. Guardians of the Galaxy was the first of the MCU films I saw in the cinema, and I absolutely loved it. Easily my favourite film series within the MCU. It has such a strong director's vision. They push the boundaries of what a Marvel movie can be. The characters are all fun and likeable. The cinematography is easily the best of all the Marvel movies. The framing of some of those shots is fantastic, and the colours are beautiful. Visually, it looks a lot nicer than nearly all of the other Marvel films. The characters, the humour, the music, it was all so much fun. It honestly didn't feel like a superhero movie, and in many ways that is one of its strengths. It felt like something new and creative. You could argue it's an origin story of the group, but it avoids the trappings that superhero origin stories fall into. The Guardians films are also the only time I've ever felt real emotion in these Marvel movies. I felt so sad with what happened to Groot at the end. And don't get me started on how I felt at the end of Guardians 2. So if you can't tell, I'm going to put this right at the top of the list. I think Age of Ultron is a bad film with lots of good scenes in it. I love the scene where Ultron first appears, it's creepy and tense. I love the Hulk vs Iron Man fight, but the overall film is quite weak. Giving Ultron this jokey personality was a terrible idea. His moving facial features looked horrible. This robot should be a cold clinical killing machine, like the Terminator or Hillary Clinton. It shouldn't be cracking one-liners. The hundreds and thousands of robots were only there so the good guys had something to punch. I thought Tony Stark retired at the end of Iron Man 3, and now he's back in action without even addressing that at all. The story was so messy. It had far too many characters and most of them were useless and have no point in the story. The whole film didn't really have much of substance, but it had a few enjoyable parts. And this film goes here. I was quite looking forward to Ant-Man, but I found it disappointing. I enjoyed parts of it, some of it was funny, but on the whole the experience was underwhelming. It wasn't funny enough, the action scenes weren't exciting enough, the villain wasn't villain enough. They did the characters well, that was at least successful, although Michael Douglas did annoy me and the bad guy felt more like a TV actor. I know he is mainly a TV actor, but you know what I mean, he just felt very pedestrian. The cinematography was inconsistent. If it was on a live action set, the camera would be fairly static. If it was a CGI shot, the camera would be swooping all over the place. This made all of the scenes where Ant-Man shrinks come across as fake, and all of the normal sized parts to be visually bland. I do appreciate how small scale the threat level is. The whole world isn't at stake for once, and I appreciate that. Captain America Civil War feels more like a full-on Avengers movie than it does a Captain America film. It's about on the same level as The Winter Soldier for me. I'd probably lean a little bit more towards Civil War. Some things I like a bit more, but other things I like a bit less. Civil War has a more emotional story at its core than The Winter Soldier did. It's about the emotional drama between the characters and I gravitate to that more. Ant-Man's admiration for Captain America was fun, and Black Panther was portrayed so well in this film. I loved every moment he was on screen. I also loved how the villain was just a guy who knew he was completely outmatched, so instead he went about his plan in a much more interesting way, instead of just going for a brute force approach like a lot of the other MCU villains. I started to get worried towards the end that the villain would release all those other super soldiers in the secret chamber and it'd end in a big dumb fight against these guys we know nothing about. But to my surprise, when the heroes arrived, the villain had already killed all the super soldiers. It was so much smarter than I was expecting, and from there Iron Man finds out that Bucky killed his parents.
Bucky, get a hold of yourself.
The culmination of the opposing viewpoints between Captain America and Iron Man was very satisfying. It felt very personal. It was just these 2 or 3 characters with no distractions or other people getting in the way. I loved it. My only real dislike of the film is the airport scene. It was fun enough, I guess, but it felt like filler to me. The film was great when it was actually killing people. The movie had consequences and there were serious risks involved. But the airport fight scene took much longer than it needed and everyone was pulling their punches. They didn't want to hurt each other and that lowered the stakes. Even so, it's only a minor gripe I have and it's still pretty entertaining as far as fight scenes go. It just stood out as the weakest part of the movie. I can't help but think the story feels unfinished. At the end we have the Hobbit guy gloating over the villain saying his plan has failed, but then the villain smiles and says, "Did it?" This sets up the expectation that there's more to this story, but there's never a second part and it's completely forgotten from here on out. The Sokovia Accords don't play a part in any future movies, except for one where they're hand waved away.
Arrest them.
All over it.
No one is after Spider-Man in Homecoming for doing something without legal permission, for example. Shouldn't Iron Man arrest him or something? For the longest time I thought there was meant to be a second part to this Civil War film to wrap everything up, but apparently not. Still, it's a fantastic film. I'll put it just above The Winter Soldier. This might be a controversial opinion, but I didn't think much of Doctor Strange. I enjoyed some parts of it, but mostly I found it mediocre. I'm not a big fan of Benedict Cumberbatch, so I guess that doesn't help. This was one of the more serious Marvel films, and I often found the humour got in the way of the drama I was otherwise enjoying. The Doctor Strange character was an arrogant guy that was meant to be humbled in order to learn all this magic stuff, but he's still arrogant at the end, and in any movie following this. Gaining his skills came far too easy to him. Remember when I said it took an hour and 15 minutes before you see the Iron Man suit in the first Iron Man movie? Well, it's only 40 minutes until you see Doctor Strange use his powers. The weight is smaller, and we've already seen other people use the magic powers as the film opens with it, so it's not nearly as satisfying when he finally uses magic. On top of that, Tony Stark is working on building the Iron Man suits for a long time. He builds the shoddy version in the cave that barely works, and then he spends time trying to perfect that design. It's less than 10 minutes from when Doctor Strange begins studying magic to when he's able to use it. Less than 10 minutes. 8 minutes to be exact. Can you imagine how terrible it would be if in the first Iron Man film Tony Stark takes less than 10 minutes to build his Iron Man suit? Doctor Strange is a stock origin story that doesn't have anything to offer besides the visuals. The humour was forced, more than usual for these Marvel movies. I liked the outsmarting of the god thing at the end, but it felt too quick. It felt like the god rolled over within a couple of minutes. The film follows the standard superhero origin story, but it doesn't do anything different enough to make it stand out from the crowd, and it doesn't do anything well enough to make it feel worth watching. I'd put this just under the original Captain America film. It's competently made, but I just don't get any real enjoyment out of it. I think I like Guardians 2 more than the first, but I'm not sure. It's more colourful, more exciting, a lot more emotional. However, the first movie feels a lot more streamlined with its story. In Guardians 2 they have more characters and they're spread out a bit, which I don't mind at all, but I can't deny I enjoy having them all together and interacting as a group. And I do think I like the soundtrack in the original Guardians a touch more. They improve almost every aspect from the first film. The camera framing, the characters, the colour and lighting. The creativity is bursting out of this movie in every shot. Honestly, depending on my mood, I could say either this or the first Guardians is my favourite movie in the MCU. I like them both, don't make me choose, but for the sake of this list, I'm going to rank the second Guardians at the top. I loved Yondu in these films, and having him be more prominent in the sequel was great. I've never been so happy to see a bunch of people being murdered as I have in that Arrow scene, and goddamn was that a punch in the stomach when he died. Spider-Man Homecoming is my favourite live-action Spider-Man movie. Yeah, I loved Spider-Man 2 when it came out as well, but the film does feel a bit dated now. I don't like James Franco or Kirsten Dunst in the movie. The Mary Jane character was a horrible person, and some of the dialogue was poorly written. Some of the more exaggerated elements that Sam Raimi brings to the filmmaking don't work for me either. It's incredibly corny. I mean, they work in his other films like The Evil Dead, but not in Spider-Man. And I've always had a problem with superheroes that lose their powers. It's partly the reason I've never been too invested in the X-Men, as they're constantly having their powers turned on and off like a light switch. Still, Spider-Man 2 is a good film. I'm not saying it's bad, I just prefer Homecoming. I'd certainly say Spider-Man Homecoming is an underrated film. They really capture the essence of a friendly neighbourhood Spider-Man. The movie is surprisingly well written. It's not perfect by any means, but the writing is very well put together and a lot better than people often give it credit for. By far the weakest element are the visuals, which are kind of bland. The colours are flat and the directing style, well, it doesn't have much style, but the acting and writing elevate the film. The usual complaint I hear about this film is that it's not the same Spider-Man as in the comics, which is a fine complaint, I guess. I mean, you're complaining that it's not a faithful adaptation, but that doesn't actually mean it's bad in its own right. Being a faithful adaptation doesn't make it objectively better. If it did, Twilight would be regarded as an amazing group of films. People moan about the young Aunt May, but the old Aunt May from the comics never made any sense. She's meant to be Peter's aunt, not his grandma. I loved how small scale everything was. Some of my favourite Spider-Man villains are really lame, in a good way. They're just bank robbers with a fancy suit or some cool gloves. Having the villain be so grounded really helped the film out. The Vulture was from the same community as Spider-Man. They had a lot in common, so it made them feel connected. I thought the new design they gave the Vulture was fantastic. Can you imagine if they went with the original look from the comics, the old age pensioner in a bird costume? I'm going to put this just below Iron Man. I guess it doesn't matter anymore because everyone turned off the video when I said I like Homecoming more than Spider-Man 2. Please leave a comment telling me Spider-Man 2 is better than Homecoming and why I'm wrong. I really enjoyed Thor Ragnarok. I think it's a lot of fun. It keeps the pace going at a quick step so you never get bored. It's the first time I've actually liked the Hulk's design. I love all the little details that they put into his animation, like when he's shouting and you can see his stomach muscles tense. Someone had to sit down and actually do all this stuff. It's fantastic. The characters are all likeable. I particularly liked Loki, who I was never really a big fan of before. That's not to say he was bad, but he was always very serious and brooding. In this, I felt he was torn between remaining loyal to his brother or going off and doing his own thing. This created a new dynamic in their relationship that I appreciated. One of my favourite scenes is when Odin says he loves Thor and Loki.
I love you, my sons.
It's the look on Loki's face. It's a mixture of surprise, happiness, and finally being accepted. It's small things like this which made me enjoy Loki so much in this movie. After watching one of the trailers, it felt like we were going to get a lot more wacky space stuff and only a little time spent on Asgard, but it was almost the opposite of that. The Asgard scenes were fine, but the stuff on the other planet with the gladiator arena and all the vibrant colours was much more interesting. Most of the movie is filmed on a green screen and some of it is noticeable. I never find it distracting or badly done, but I would have preferred some more practical sets. Also, large parts of the film are heavily improvised and I can tell. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it always sticks out in the back of my brain that it was improvised. It feels slightly separate from the surrounding scenes. Still, I think it's a really fun and exciting film. It's a great direction to take Thor and the Hulk. I really enjoyed the Valkyrie character and Loki. I love the birthday song. I'll put this above Spider-Man but below Winter Soldier. Marvel have been on a roll recently. Out of the last 9 movies released, 6 of them have made it into my top 10. Nearly all of my favourite MCU films have been released together, so how could they mess up Black Panther? I was insanely excited about this film. Black Panther was one of my favourite elements from Civil War. I thought he was amazing for the small amount of screen time he had, and you're telling me he's getting his own solo film. I couldn't wait. And then I saw the movie.
You done fucked up now!
The world building was so bad I was confused for most of the movie and I ended up zoning out at the end. Every scene has something that contradicts what the film is trying to tell you or is completely nonsensical to begin with. Even something as simple as Wakanda being a high-tech, super-secret country that nobody outside knows about. Okay, fine, but then when Black Panther is flying towards home, so he's actually outside of Wakanda now, people start waving at him. So these people must know about Wakanda and its technology, right? Even though the film states otherwise. Or what about how the Black Panther gets his superpowers from a plant? I mean, why does only the Black Panther drink the plant juice and gain superpowers? Why wouldn't they give these superpowers to their soldiers and spies? Don't you think that'd be useful? You've got superpowers that literally grow on trees. Oh, and the special effects are the worst in any of the MCU movies. I really wanted Infinity War to be good. Before it was released, I started to get worried it would be a letdown. My expectations were high, but they were also high for Black Panther, and that was a terrible movie. So I started to get really nervous. And then the film came out, and I loved it.
Lovely. I like that. Nice.
I loved how they made Thanos the central character. Anytime he talked was good. Even in a few words, you got a very strong sense of his character. I really enjoyed exploring his personality. He wasn't just a mindless brute, they gave him emotions and nuance. It shocked me when he started crying, and it's actually one of my favourite scenes from the film. It was so unexpected. They got the perfect balance for this character. He was incredibly interesting. As soon as the film starts, it has this dark, serious tone to it. Instead of that triumphant music that plays over the Marvel logo, you just get silence. And instead of opening on an action sequence like you would probably expect, you just see the aftermath. All these dead bodies scattered around, and moments later Thanos beats the crap out of the Hulk, and you immediately understand this is a villain to be feared. You understand his power. They also did a great job balancing such a huge amount of characters. Sure, a lot of them don't get all that much to do on an individual level, but it was a fantastic idea to split them off into groups and then give each group something interesting to do. And each character gets their own little moment to shine.
I've mastered the ability of standing so incredibly still that I've become invisible to the eye.
After seeing Drax trying to remain invisible, it struck me he learnt that trick from Groot. I think Drax's vision must be based on movement, like a T-Rex.
Don't move. Can't see us if we don't move.
He can't see Groot when he stops moving, and Drax thinks he's invisible if he doesn't move. Surely his vision is based on movement. It's got to be, right? And I bet you don't know which superhero lives in that building.
They okay?
Honey!
There's no one here.
Where's my super suit?
What?
Where is my super suit?
With the big battle at the end, there was a chance it would devolve into a brainless fight against faceless enemies, kind of like what happened with Age of Ultron, but they gave the villains some key characters for the audience to focus on. It felt a lot like the MCU version of Helm's Deep. I loved the film. I'd be satisfied if the MCU movies stopped here with everyone turning to dust. Ant-Man and the Wasp was another not very good film. I found it boring for the most part. Michael Douglas's character annoyed me a lot. He just moans about everything and talks down to everyone. The villain had a really interesting gimmick, but they never used it in a creative way. A lot of the stuff doesn't make any sense. They establish how certain things work, but then they break those rules. Because of its light-hearted tone, I find it a lot easier to watch than the more serious Marvel films that are equally as bad. Captain Marvel. What a bland, uninteresting character. When the best character in your film is a cat, you know you've got a serious problem on your hands. People moan about Iron Man 2 all of the time, but it had way more substance and style than this piece of crap. I've said before that the best Marvel movies have a strong director's voice, but this is the opposite of that. It's got negative voice. It's like the directors couldn't be bothered to put in any effort at all. Some of the shots were amateurish at best. The script is weak and the characters are boring. And to make it even worse, it's a prequel. I mean, how many actual good prequels are there? Name 5. Leave a comment below with 5 good prequels. I bet you can't do it. Now how many bad prequels are there? I can name 20 off the top of my head. So with it being a prequel, it undermines a number of things from the other MCU movies. Honestly, I don't know why they didn't just wait until after Endgame to release this movie. They could have easily reworked the script so it wasn't a prequel, but then again, if they're doing that, they could have reworked the script so it wasn't boring. I'd put this very low on the list. I enjoyed the bleak tone of Endgame. Seeing everyone depressed and miserable was great. I like the movie overall, but it has a few weaker elements compared to Infinity War. The first time I watched it, I found it really jarring with what they did with the Hulk. It took me a very long time to get used to it, and I'm still not sure it sits with me properly. A lot of people had a problem with Thor, but what they did with his character made sense to me. He seems so depressed and in denial he just shuts himself away and pretends like nothing happened, so when the Hulk bursts in talking about Thanos he can't deal with it. It all works well for me and I don't have any problem with it. Captain Marvel has no point in the story at all. She saves Tony Stark, then she's out of the film until she destroys the ship at the end. I had no idea how the Avengers were going to deal with this massive ship during the big battle. I wouldn't say she came in and saved the day like I was worried she was going to, but she did break some of the tension. I had no idea how the Avengers were going to deal with this massive ship during the big battle. It was a point of rising tension, but then Captain Marvel just shows up and destroys it.
Very well. Deus Ex Machina!
It felt like lazy writing to me, trying to give her a reason to even be in the movie but at the same time not have her single-handedly overpower everyone. I would have preferred to see some creative way the Avengers could deal with that problem. I mean, you could have just had Thor do the exact same thing and it wouldn't feel so forced.
Something just entered the upper atmosphere.
The film established the rules for time travel and then proceeds to break those rules. It's not a huge deal for me because at that point I was just along for the ride, but it is a plot hole and therefore makes the film a bit weaker. It's also a shame the Thanos they fight at the end isn't the same Thanos from Infinity War. Instead they fight this new Thanos who is essentially a brand new character. He's still Thanos, but he's at a point in time where he has no history with the Avengers, so it loses the emotional connection. The Thanos they defeat at the end of the movie isn't the one responsible for wiping out half of all life, and to be honest, I think seeing the Avengers fight that version of Thanos would have been more emotionally impactful, but they killed him off near the start of the movie. An example would be when Scarlet Witch says Thanos took everything from her. I mean, he hasn't actually done anything. He didn't kill Vision, that was the other Thanos. And even his response is basically, who are you?
You took everything from me.
I don't even know who you are.
It would have been so much stronger if this Thanos would have been the Thanos from Infinity War. Imagine how much more emotional the scene between Scarlet Witch and him would have been. Still, the ending was pretty good. In my review of Endgame, I mentioned how there was an awkward shot where they deliberately put all of the female characters together for one heroic pose. The problem I had is that it felt forced. They actually did something a bit similar in Infinity War, but they did it in a way that felt completely natural, so I didn't even notice. I had to have it pointed out to me. I guess this all sounds quite negative, but I did really enjoy the film. Having the characters travel back in time to different movies and messing around was a lot of fun. Yeah, I know it's blatant fan service, but after about 20 odd movies I think they can throw a bit in. And there were some nice twists on some memorable scenes. Lots of people at the cinema I was in were crying when Iron Man died and at his funeral scene. I didn't really feel all that emotion from it. Sure, it was sad seeing a character die, but it didn't bother me too much. I would put Endgame quite high, but not at the top. It's a very flawed but still entertaining film. And for the last film in the franchise so far, Spider-Man Far From Home has all the flaws from Spider-Man Homecoming, and it took everything good about Homecoming and made it worse. I've already done a video on this, so you can check that out for some more details if you like. The film established that Tony Stark gives Peter access to his high-tech glasses, along with an enormous amount of combat drones that can produce holograms and shoot things and so on. This just left a huge plot hole. Tony Stark died in Endgame, so in order for him to have made the drones, he would have had to have done it before Endgame, which just brings up the question, why didn't Tony use these highly effective combat drones to fight Thanos and his army? It makes no sense. And if it's only drones inside the holograms, surely everyone shooting at the monsters would hit some drones and cause the hologram to glitch. The rules for the drones are so ill-defined, I don't know what the limitations are, and therefore it just feels like they can or can't do anything whenever the script calls for it. Apparently a lot of people like this movie and some are calling it the best Spider-Man film ever. I honestly don't understand what people see in it. In my review I gave it a 5 or a 6 out of 10, I even think that was too high. My opinion on it might change in the future, but I'd never want to watch it again. I'd rather watch Ant-Man and the Wasp. And that's it. That's how I would rank all of the MCU movies so far. Like I said earlier, make sure you let me know what order you'd put them in and why you think I'm wrong. Currently, the future of the MCU seems uncertain. A lot of the characters people are invested in are leaving. Spider-Man got taken out of the MCU for a while recently, but it seems they've brought him back for a movie or two. After that his contract ends, so who knows? It's almost as if the MCU has been reset and has to start again from scratch. Marvel have announced a whole host of new films, but out of all of them the only one I'm interested in is Guardians 3. A number of upcoming films, like Black Widow, are prequels, which always turn out great. And now they're making a bunch of MCU series for their Disney Plus streaming service that connect to the films. They could turn out great, but if it's expected that people watch all of these different series on top of all of these films just to understand what's going on, I can see a lot of people getting overwhelmed and frustrated and turning away from the MCU as a whole. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's a possibility, and some of these upcoming movies sound terrible. It seems odd to me that Sam Wilson is going to be the next Captain America. I like him as a character more than the Winter Soldier, but out of the two, I would have thought the Winter Soldier would make the better Captain America. I know the Winter Soldier is vulnerable because of his brainwashing thing, but you could sort that out with a bit of that Wakandan technology and some creative writing. Sam Wilson doesn't even have superpowers, he's just a guy with wings. Apparently the new Thor movie is going to have Jane Foster become worthy and use Thor's hammer, which is fine, I guess, but she's going to be called Thor, which makes no sense. It doesn't make any sense for anyone who picks up the hammer to be named Thor. They gain the powers of Thor, they don't get his name. Captain America is a title, Thor is his name. Even when he wasn't worthy, he was still Thor. So since Vision and Captain America picked up the hammer, are their names Thor as well? That's 4 different Thors we've got now. And for some reason we're not supposed to call Jane Foster the female Thor, although at this point in time that's the only thing that people can grasp onto that differentiates her from the original Thor. Thor Odin's son, often called the Mighty Thor. Okay, so we can't call them both Thor, don't you see how that would be confusing? We need a way to differentiate between them. The whole thing is a mess, and to make it even worse, a lot of people are throwing Twitter politics all over it. Taika Waititi has a history of making good films, so hopefully it'll turn out alright, but it is sounding very odd at the moment. Apparently Doctor Strange 2 is going to be the first scary film for Marvel. A lot of places seem to be reporting that it's going to be a horror movie, but that's not what the director said. He said Doctor Strange 2 is going to be the MCU's first scary movie. That's very different from a horror film. And do you really think Disney will make a horror movie? Really? I want all the future films to turn out well. I hope they do, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. They do have the X-Men and Fantastic Four available to them now, so they certainly have a lot of options with regards to the direction they could take. Do you think they'll introduce Galactus? Thank you for watching, I'll see you next time.
I am inevitable.
I missed the part where that's my problem.